Success in the media business doesn't happen overnight. It's a bumpy, complicated, high-stakes journey. It's all about staying alive whilst navigating between big losses and big wins. And I know, because I lived through it for 16 years. My name's Sam Barcroft, and 2 decades ago, I started a business from my back bedroom in Tottenham, building it into an international content company and finally selling it in 2019. Since then, I've been helping other entrepreneurs to scale their businesses. And one of the most important elements to success is the belief that anything is possible if you're truly committed. So, welcome to the Big Swing podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, behind-the-scenes business stories from the world's most successful content creators. We break down their remarkable careers into the 3 most pivotal moments, the big swings that shape their future on their journey to success. And now you can learn just what is possible from these inspiring entrepreneurs and shoot for the stars. It's time for the big swing. Today's guest isn't just an A-list TV presenter, he's also a new media pioneer who's done more than almost anyone to bring history to life for a global audience. Dan Snow co-founded HistoryHit on the sly as a few anonymous social media accounts whilst presenting primetime history shows for the BBC. Today, HistoryHit is the world's leading online platform for all things historical. It's a subscription video service with extraordinary documentaries. The eponymous podcast is one of the most popular history shows on the planet. And of course, there's all the other action on Twitter and Instagram too. I've got to say that when it comes to history, I'm more of an FA Cup final man rather than a lower league season ticket holder. I'm there for the big global stories. But for me, Dan's Twitter feed brings history to life, making it accessible, relevant, even urgent, crucial ingredients to gaining a wider understanding of what's going on in the world. Dan gets content in a really deep way. And I had to start by asking him how he got into history in the first place.
Well, I built the love of history through brutalisation as a child. My whole family love it. You get it with our mother's milk in our family. And so I was just taken off to every single battlefield, castle, museum, you name it. And everyone goes, "Oh, did you enjoy it?" And I was like, "No, I didn't enjoy it. I wanted to play football on the common with my friends." And as a result, I am bad at football and good at history. And I'm not sure about, maybe that was a good trade. No, my dad and mum were both TV journalists. So they love cameras. And when I was a kid, they used to sort of get their big old VHF video camera out, whatever, and say, "Right, kids, tell us where we are. Do a piece to camera." So like, "Hey, here we are at the Battle of Hastings." And none of those videos will ever be seen. But there is actually funny. If I'm in my mum and dad's house at the moment, and they're probably close to me now somewhere in this big jumble of old gear from 40 years ago. And so yeah, just that's where it all began. And then I had a great teacher at school, very lucky, and he sort of encouraged me in it. And then went to uni and all that. So,
do you remember your teacher's name?
Mr. Perry, Mr. Keith Perry.
There you go. Well, I love a teacher. It's always good to name check those people that do all the heavy lifting. And so you went on to study history at uni, is that right?
Lucky enough to study history at uni, and which is a great course, but other kids had to sort of do lots of work, and we just read books and then wrote essays and chatted about them. And also, I was lucky enough to study in a place like Oxford where the weather, like the history's all around you. It's very inspiring to be in those kind of historic buildings and historic streets. And I never wanted to go into the media because my mum and dad both in the media, and my cousin John Snow, people might have seen on Channel 4 News, if you're listening abroad, he was a big newsreader as well. So like 3 or 4 members of my family are all journalists, and so I never wanted to do that. And then had a sort of accidental, I was rowing in the Oxford and Cambridge boat race, and I ended up doing lots of VTs, short videos for the BBC Sport. And someone saw one of those and thought that I could come and do some history at the BBC, and then I was just ridiculously lucky and privileged. And it was in the way of TV after lots of different weird conversations, and it ended up with me and Dad doing a history show together in 2002, 20 years ago now. And that was it. And I was just very, very lucky and kept going from there. But I think probably as it pertains to this conversation, I was quite aware that it felt like everyone felt like the last days of the fall of Rome. They're all drinking, having a nice time with their togas on and eating grapes. And you're like, I think you guys are all about to be swept away. And I'm not claiming to be super young and my finger on the pulse, but I was, come from a place where me and my mates were all exchanging things, listening to music and online or whatever. And I thought, on demand is going to just wreck this whole industry, isn't it? And really, ever since that first moment, I was very lucky to be in TV, but I was looking for ways to get out of it and into digital from the beginning. It took me About 16 years.
Yeah, but look, it must have felt like something fantastic was dropping into the lap of those people at the BBC, because now pretty much everyone age 20 has got some kind of presenting experience because they all do it into their phones all day and all night. But back then, very few people actually knew how to do a piece to camera or understood the grammar of doing that. And so all those holidays that you've been going on with the family where you've been doing pieces to camera from exotic battlefields probably set you up for a fast start. Is that fair?
I think it is, and although I would say I look back and I definitely I learned a lot, and it was a quick learning curve. But yes, I think that's right. I mean, the really hard thing, especially in factual, is you were getting these people, age 30, oceanographers, lion specialists, historians. You attract the attention of a producer because you contribute to a show, and they're like, "Oh, this new presenter's really exciting. Let's get them to do." Like there's no kind of there aren't many in specialist factual TV. There aren't many kind of starter jobs. You're in 9 o'clock, BBC Two Friday, right? And actually, unless they deliver straight off the bat, everyone's like, "Oh, they're a bit wooden, aren't they?" There's no kind of training. There's no baby slopes. There's never any suggestion that perhaps you work with that neuroscientist and you go, right, you've got 2 minutes to sort of explain what the brain is. It's an underrated skill. I would say that because that's the only thing I'm good at in the world. But, it's quite a hard thing to do. And, someone says, right, why did the First World War start? If you ask an expert in the First World War, the chances are their head will fall off. With me,
Yeah.
I've got that's what I do. And I can go, okay, I'll have a go at it and give you 2 minutes while the First World War started. And that's why you get these kind of the inbuilt privilege of acting families, because when you're an acting family, you're doing play readings over Christmas. You're doing you go out and play charades. After New Year's Eve. And that's why it's really hard to break into those careers, because these kids are pretty good at it, right? And I enjoyed that privilege and very, very lucky. Yeah, I was very comfortable around cameras. I was very comfortable around factual content and summarizing things. That's what my mum and dad did for a living. It's what we did in our house. We couldn't speak languages, but we kind of knew content.
But despite Dan's luck finding himself presenting shows on the subject he loved for the BBC, he also knew deep down that his luck could run out.
I was like 28, getting paid, sleeping in hotels. Someone sent a taxi around the house, no hassle. And I thought, God, I'm just the cleverest, coolest guy in the whole world. And then I suddenly realized, hold on a minute, this is just going nowhere. This is a big problem, because a kind of interesting, enthusiastic 27-year-old talking about history is very different to a graying, hair-losing 44-year-old talking about history, which I am now, right? And so that you might just present for the rest of your life on BBC and Discovery and History and Netflix, but you probably won't. And so really, I was spending my late 20s and early 30s thinking, crikey, I need a lifeboat here. I need to get some control, because I can't be going into these meetings with commissioners and having them going to go, who's this loser?
And I suppose that kind of tees us up for your first big swing, really, which was thinking about how you could build that lifeboat, which is maybe where HistoryHit started to form in your mind.
Yeah, and I felt nervous coming to this podcast because my swings all seem really small compared to the success you've enjoyed. But then when I heard the podcast with you and your business partner talking about your swings, I suddenly went, oh, okay, cool. That's very relatable, because some of those swings are quite small and seem small at the time, but of course are huge, huge things. For me, yeah. So
absolutely.
So I just started like a social media presence. It sounds ridiculous, but I just like a Facebook page, a Twitter page, an Instagram page, and called it HistoryHit, so that it was separate, because I was aware that there's lots of people in the world who might think Dan Snow's a bit of a twat. So I thought, well, let's build a history site which is not about me, but it's scalable, and I'll put an interesting fact about history up every day. And Lincoln Cathedral, how it took over from the Great Pyramid of Giza as the world's tallest building, like fun stuff like that. And the power that you've talked about this, the power of starting something, even if it's absolutely minuscule, the power of saying to yourself, other people, and an online audience, however small, hi everybody, this is a thing that I've planted a little flag here. And it seems like nothing, but when you do it, it starts to get a momentum all of its own, and an importance of its own. And you think, yeah, this is a thing that now exists. Maybe it is just a stupid little fraction of Mark Zuckerberg's big website, but it's a thing. It's a little thing. And most of them die on the vine. And I'd go months without probably posting and think, oh, God, what am I doing with this stupid little thing? And it was quite weird to me, because at the time I was enjoying superficially success. Like I was on shows, and millions of people watch those shows, because the BBC in those days would get millions of people just at any old show, and they get bought in the States, and I'd get Facebook messages and stuff from people in Arkansas. Oh, I like your program. But at the same time, I was just a talking head. The cameramen always call it a flesh prop. I had no skin in it. If my show got licensed to 40 states, it was flattering. That's where they get you. It's flattering. You feel good about yourself. You think, hey man, I'm famous, I'm on TV. But actually, you've got nothing. and they can turn that light switch off immediately. And I felt very vulnerable.
There was some jeopardy, though, Dan, I would say, for a presenter who's doing well in the public eye, who's getting some fantastic shows away, that's building a really strong career by that stage as a loved personality in the UK and abroad. Starting that social must have felt a little bit of a career risk. A lot of people now would probably advise against it, I would say.
Yeah, you know what, Sam? It's interesting you said that. There were like seriously embarrassing moments because if I was having downtime between projects, I'd like go to a local cast line to try that. Everyone was like, "Oh, live streaming is the thing," and I'd be like, "Well, I'll try live stream." And, you're there as a sort of vaguely established UK sort of talent, as they say, a presenter, host, if you're listening in North America, and you're there like talking into your iPhone and like 5 people are watching. You have to undergo humiliation, I think, as an entrepreneur. You have to be the guy that is like, oh, I used to be a big deal. Now I'm like fixing the photocopier and I'm like cleaning out the toilets are plugged in the office, and like I'm the guy, right? There's no one else going to unplug these toilets, and I think it's the pride that messes with you, right? The pride of going like, I'm too important to this. I'm I've got a show going out tonight. It got 3.5 million people on BBC One. Woo! But in my own time, I'm like trying to get this little stupid thing to go viral. I'm like screwing up the formatting. But I think because it was such easy come to me, because it was such a joke, the way I got into TV, I was so lucky, so privileged. I had a very strong sense of my own frailty. I guess the fact is I felt, God, what they gave, they can take away. And that's why I was looking for that life raft.
It's clever. A lot of people don't do it. We've seen many people in our industry kind of standing around going, what happened? When all of a sudden they're not flavor of the month anymore. So I actually credit you with a lot more than kind of nerves. I think it's probably quite astute. And how did you feel, Dan, when that social presence started to build?
Yeah, you've talked very interestingly. It's really inspiring to me about your first viral in the past, and I thought, that I can obviously relate to that. And yeah, in your day job, people like, oh, I saw you on that Viking show last night. That was great. And I'm like, yeah, but that is not as exciting as the fact that 2,000 people retweeted my social. Like looking back in the day,
Yeah.
these. But that was electrifying because I felt for the first time I had something that was mine and that no one could take away from me. And it was small, but there was a pathway. When you think, I'm at the beginning of something here, but I think it is scalable. And when you see that glimpse of a path, and all of our paths are very different. Everyone listening to this will have had different industries, different paths. But when you get that glimpse, you think, "Ooh, this is interesting," and it was really, really exciting. But you couldn't really talk about it with anyone because it appeared to be much smaller and less relevant than all the other stuff that was basically your day job at that point. So it was a very private experience. But it was great.
And what's so interesting about entrepreneurship is you could see the promise and the potential in that. But probably when you tried it out on other people, they weren't interested, because that's the curse of the entrepreneur, is you're very excited about something that nobody else seems to be able to have any understanding of why it have any importance at all.
There's traditionally a view that history skews old anyway. In terms of the book market, it does. So therefore, there's 2 bell curves on a graph. This is like 2015, let's say, or 2010. There's a bell curve, people who are trying to find digital content, and it's down at one end of the chart, and then it's people who are interested in history. It's sort of the other end of the chart. And I think there's an element of truth to that, although it does ignore the fact that actually history is a very popular A-level option, very popular. So like lots of kids study it, lots of kids are engaging with it. There are history brands like Horrible Histories, like Ubisoft, like Assassin's Creed, like history adjacent brands for younger people. But I knew what would happen is that eventually, I never believed that young people weren't interested in history. So that's my starting point. I always thought if we get the right sort of stuff, that young people are going to engage with it, and we can come back to that. And I believe they have. Secondly, however, I knew that the bell curves would they'd all expand. So that generation of digital natives was going to get into their 30s and 40s and get to history, plus old people were going to get into it because they didn't have a choice. And of course, the pandemic and the last few years proved absolutely, as our nan started Zooming and getting Netflix. So those 2 bets particularly that second bet really paid off. But yeah, initially people were like, what are you doing? Like, stop pissing around when you could. Why don't you try and develop a big series? But yeah, everyone looks at when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, everyone thinks you're just weird.
I think it's actually the ecosystem requires it in a funny way.
I think you're right.
That's a whole nother conversation. The one thing a lot of people hit me up with at that time was disruption of your broadcast career. So like, were you nervous that the two worlds were going to clash and cause you problems, i.e. that commissioners might get fed up with the digital stuff?
Yeah, well, that happened around sort of 2014, 15, 16, 17, about 4 years there, where those were the hardest years of my life, partly because also I had kids at that time. So the sort of sheen had come off my TV career a bit, and I was like, I want to be at home a bit more. I want to see my kids. I had a wife. I need, you have different priorities. And yeah, I was trying to ride two horses and hope that neither of them noticed each other, and that became increasingly difficult. So as the podcast started to do quite well, the people started to notice. And I think people at the BBC were like, I think you might be taking the piss now, because you've shot an interview with this old Second World War veteran for our TV show, and you're sneaking out round the back while everyone else is having lunch, interviewing him on your phone. So hang on a minute, mate. It was clear that I couldn't have my cake and eat it at that point.
Dan was upping his game on social media, and it was noticed by those around him. Soon enough, he'd expanded into podcasting, and his intuitive sense of what people wanted to listen to helped turn the History Hit podcast into one of the most popular history shows in the world. For me, the podcast genius USP is that it brings history to life by using current events as jumping off points, recounting relevant history that adds depth and context to today's news.
So the best podcast we've done this year, the most popular podcast this year by a mile, has been Royal Princes feuding, right? So William and Harry's book comes out. All the hot takes are around Harry's book. Everyone's like, oh, this page 58. Oh, what's going on? Oh, blah, blah. I'm like, you can own all those takes. I've got a whole area of takes over here that no one else is owning, which is like, in our history, princes have fallen out all the time. There's nothing new here. Why do brothers fall out in a royal system, in a patriarchy, in a primogeniture situation? Well, this is why. And then here are some funny examples. So it's funny, it's important, it's of the moment. That's where History Hit can do really well.
I would say it's because you make the people that listen to the podcast feel brainy, because they can then go and talk at their yoga class or in the pub or wherever else about Harry in a way that none of the rest of their friends can, which is the gift that you're giving and why people care about your content so much. And
fresh takes, everyone. Fresh takes available here.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. With some substance. So it actually isn't just a cultural take, it's actually a factual one. And taking that from where you were then, muddling along with your BlackBerry in a wet field in Anglesey or somewhere like that, to where you are now, having an amazing team of people that can help this content come to life and reach loads more people around the world. You'd built a big social graph. You'd then been brave enough to hit up a podcast that started doing really well. Your next big swing was to set up a whole platform, to set up an SVOD, a Netflix of history, which, oh my God, that must have been so exciting and so terrifying all at once.
The great thing about the podcast was that first billing, that was the first day anyone had basically paid me. We got a check from Acast because we read an advert on the front. This was the first time I'd ever gone, oh, look, I've got X number of listeners and someone's paid me £512 for it. It's like, it was establishing that link after years of trying to work out how digital could sort of scalably pay was a very special moment. Now, at the same time, the evidence from the podcast, but also just generally, SVOD was having a moment. Subscription video was having a moment. Netflix, I think, were out with House of Cards, and you may remember this. There was a sort of a flutter of niche SVODs. So opera, horse riding, gardening, you would pay for that content. So it wouldn't be just on YouTube. It was a bit before the community sort of Patreon model, which I think is probably more popular now. Everyone was casting about for ways to support content and how was people going to pay. But then because of Netflix, maybe the Times going paywalled, everyone was slowly going, do you know what, we're going to have to pay for content. And that's the only time I've ever gone out for investment. So we started an entity, felt kind of maybe a bit buoyed up by the podcast and a bit good for morale. We went out and did a fundraiser, which was, as you know, is a very odd and strange experience. But we also crowdfunded off the podcast and off my existing audience on the social media platforms. We crowdfunded 150 grand, and then we matched that ish with SEIS investors and EIS and stuff. And then we got a platform off the ground, and which is expensive because that's a big thing. Unlike a podcast, which is a phone and an audio file, and if you fail, it's not going to break you. This was a big deal because you'd convince people to give you a bit of money. It was quite public, and you had to build an engine, you had to build a front page, an engine, a paywall. We've got 100 grand content budget. Let's make our own content. And I said, no, let's license some from the BBC because I want people to open up this page and they just have a good, the minute you open it, you see, oh, there's programs I recognize. I wanted it to feel dependable and real. We were also making new content as well all the time and bootstrapping it. But should we have just put all of our money into that? Maybe that would have been the right thing too. But that was real startup time. It was in an office in Willesden, with sort of mad place falling apart. Things not working, the friction that you've described.
Yeah, is that where you were taking the bins out and locking up and all that stuff?
Changing light bulbs and again, a little bit of pride. But weirdly, I just felt at this time in my life, the adventure was good and it was a fight worth fighting. And the data was often disappointing, but you'd have enough days where the data looked good or it looked interesting. You thought, well, I think we'll just give this a few more months, and it was very difficult. I mean, the other thing is super difficult is, you haven't got the personnel, right? You've got founders, but we didn't have the right people. We didn't know how to do things. Didn't have the digital marketing. It's and you can't get that in because you haven't got the resource. It's a terrible chicken egg that all entrepreneurs listening to this will feel. Is that you think you know what to do, but you can't do it because you can't get to scale. And you can't get to scale because you can't do what you need to do, and it can make you go crazy.
I'm really humbled by Dan opening up about the stress of being a founder, because it just reminds me of the hard times I faced and the relentless challenges lots of entrepreneurs are facing right now. I know I struggled, and I wondered how Dan had coped.
Well, I didn't cope with it brilliantly. Lots of weird things for me, because first of all, you go to a meeting where people are kind of arguing and it's bad, you're in Willesden, and then it's like, all right, Dan, you've got to go to the Tower of London now and be super enthusiastic about Tower of London. You're like, hey everyone, how's it going? live stream, podcast, video, and you're there going, oh, it's great, I've never been happier. HistoryHit is doing so well. We're going, thanks for all your support and subscribers. And then staggering home, you get an email going, oh, I can't do this anymore. And you're like, oh my goodness me. So I'm not asking for any sympathy, but it's nice to talk to someone who's been through it, because you do, having to be relentlessly upbeat and a leader and consumer facing, whilst also knowing that bits of it are kind of falling apart in the background, and oh, the service went offline all weekend, but no one noticed because we don't have 24-hour cover. You know what I mean? So it's like you come back in the office oh no, we forgot to upgrade to the password. Really silly little mistakes and stupid things that I hope, and maybe it's just me, but I hope people will resonate with people. Yeah, and then also just going for meetings with people and them just looking at you going, what are you on about? And everyone always Dan's here for a meeting with his history website thing. It's actually an online TV channel, but no one understands what you're talking about. I had anxiety that started to manifest itself physically. For the first time, some people have bad skin or headaches, or I found I had a real tightness in my sort of stomach. I was desperate not to fail. It was so public because it was me going, hello, here's my new history channel. And everyone was like, wasn't that the guy that used to be on the BBC? What's he doing? And if I'd just gone, right, it no longer exists. Can I please come and do some daytime TV for someone? I've been very privileged in my life, but they were the toughest years I've been through. But what kept me going on the bad days, there was enough data that you'd upload a bit of content and a few new subscribers would come in. And for me, it was seeing that pathway. It was establishing a link between your actions and good outcomes, because the real horror is when your actions don't work. You make a beautiful film, you stick it on YouTube, and it just falls on its ass. Guys, and you're like, okay, well, in that case, horrible. I don't know what to do. And weirdly, with the SVOD, I could make a case to myself that effort in equaled whatever product out. That's what kept me going. And the dream, which was an amazing dream, which is that you as a creator can make content without the grown-ups telling you what to do and jumping all over you, right?
Well, you had a forcing mechanism as well, didn't you? Which was that determination to carry on going, because you weren't going to hang up your cap and say, right, that's it, I can't do it. That feeling of I'm not giving up. That is absolutely a prerequisite if you're going to succeed in anything, I think, anything hard. And what you were doing was incredibly hard, right?
In that respect, I think it was incredibly hard. And you've talked about the importance of your wife and stuff. I mean, without a family, without a basic coming from a place of psychological safety and happiness, I don't know if I'd have been able to do it. The fact that I was very lucky in my relationships, kids were great. So I was able to kind of retreat on the weekend and just run around the playground with the kids and do the things that other dads do and mums do. And it's the only time in my life I've ever had Sunday night dread. I've been so privileged. I've loved school. I've loved my career. The only time in my life I've ever had what my friends would tell me about all the time. And if you're an accountant or whatever, Oh God, Sunday night. Oh my God, I can't be bothered. It's the only time I've ever had that. I used to dread Monday mornings.
What was the thing, Dan? Because like for some people, it's the stress of, will this new show work or not? Another one, it's paying the bills. Another one, it's HR.
It was A, pay the bills, and B, it was HR. Like, it was hard. We're just a small group of people, and it's like, well, who's around that we can ask to do this thing? Well, that person's around. Do they know how to do this thing? Probably not, but there's no one else. So the relationships were very difficult. The paying the bills were very difficult. It's classic startup stuff. Yeah.
Despite all the stress, Dan always held on to his dream of making history appeal to a big global audience. As long as he kept on making content and kept improving his creative game, Dan knew the audience would grow. And sure enough, his efforts were noticed. Little Dot Studios, one of the world's leading digital content owners, came in with an offer to buy HistoryHit. Dan's last big swing was a godsend.
They offered to buy us, and that solved a few problems. One is that it would help us to get to scale a bit quicker. And I'm less interested in like the amount of money I was going to make. I was more interested in the kind of creative journey, and I wanted to make great history shows and want to reach a big audience. Maybe it's my old-fashioned TV presenter narcissism now. I just wanted to be in the game. We knew we'd thrive there, and the other founders could get cleared out with money and have a success. I would stay because I was the one committed to it anyway. They would leave with a nice check, a big success. Well done. You're a founder. You've exited. Brilliant. And they can move on to other things, which they've done. And we could get on with it. And it was the best thing we've ever done because they've grown us, and we've grown to 50 staff now. And it's a happy team. It's just a good vibe.
You've gone from being the talent in front of the camera to really being the platform and the commissioner. And you've gone from being the face to the founder, which must feel just really fantastic. But before we go into that, Dan, I must talk about the kind of amazing project that you and your team have worked on with Endurance, because I was blown away by that. I remember it being on the front page of the New York Times. You guys, a small team from a scrappy SVOD in Shoreditch, have brought the world one of the most remarkable history reveals of modern times.
I mean, talk about swings. This was an extraordinary moment because my premise with HistoryHit was, and I'd seen it at the BBC. I'd been involved in events at the BBC that had significant global interest. And although it sounds ridiculous, there's loads of breaking news in history. They regularly discover things. They open tombs. They dig up Spitfires in bogs. And I knew there was enough of that. You could basically have a broadcaster which was devoted to global history, and we're only at the beginning of it. I knew that history had these zeitgeisty moments where it will. There's days when it will trend. Just these moments of virality that extend way beyond the core history market. But I'd always known that one day I'd have a chance to test that proposition out. So I got a phone call from a team of people that were going to look for the explorer Shackleton shipwreck, which is wrecked off in the Weddell Sea off Antarctica in 1915. I got a call. They were older gentlemen, nearly all of them, and they said, "Oh, you're the chap off the BBC. Can you come and do a documentary on our attempt to go and find this ship?" I was standing on a railway platform, and I was on that platform for 45 minutes. I was shouting into my phone, like the trains were going past. I was freezing my nuts off. I was like, "This is the moment. This is the call." I knew I'd get that call one day, and this is the moment. This time, I'm able to be like, "Oh, wait a minute. There's been some changes, right? The internet's happened. What we're going to do is we're going to find this shipwreck, but we're going to live stream it all. We're going to broadcast it. We're going to put it on TikTok, on Facebook, YouTube, whatever. And then at the end of it, if we find the shipwreck, we'll sell it as a show, right? And you'll have your big Nat Geo moment. You'll have your big BBC moment, which is what the older generation still like." And I was like, you can have all that, but you can also have this gigantic social media events as we're going along. We can live stream into classrooms. You can meet your charitable aims because you want to spread the story of Shackleton. That's not, no, we're not talking about a 1 hour documentary.
It's a win even if they don't find it, right?
Sam, that's the funny thing you say. I said to them, you need to take us because I'm the only organization in the world who want to come with you, and we don't need to find it. For HistoryHit, we are, our audience, our team are just thrilled to be on the expedition. That's a huge win for us. We're telling the story of Shackleton. We're telling the story of Antarctic exploration. We're looking for shipwrecks. We're looking at the technology. Then on the icing on the cake, which we then found the ship, which was great. And that was a sort of global media event. And then there was an auction, and Little Dot, obviously brilliantly, because they know that stuff like the back of their hand, they were able to decide between various big international broadcasters. And the weirdest thing, it came at exactly the right time. We had the people in place. If we'd had 6 months before, it would have been me with an iPhone running around pretending I was a media organization. Whereas now we had a whole team in place. We had a team on YouTube. We had a team on social. We had a team on the email. We had a team on the website. And so we were able to join up proper partner broadcasting. It was a swing, but it felt almost, it was almost spooky, because I knew one day something like that would come along and we could step up and be that partner for an organization like that.
Now, before we get to hear which of Dan's big swings he thinks was his most impactful, I want to tell you a little bit about next week's guest. Justin Crosby is a PR guru who left the world of global corporate communications to set up his own bespoke firm, handling production companies working across all genres, from animation to branded content, linear television to digital. As my publicist, Justin taught me more than almost anyone about how we could best tell our own story. His strategic thinking and relentless delivery was game-changing for our company's fortunes. Always inventive and ever entrepreneurial, Justin responded to the pandemic by pivoting his business. He started one of the UK media's most popular breakthrough podcasts, Telecast. It's an excellent roundup of the TV industry's big stories and trends, and a must-listen podcast. Now, back to Dan Snow. Which of his swings does he feel is the one that really made all the difference? Is it number 1, quietly opening those anonymous social media accounts under the banner of HistoryHit? Or was it number 2, going into the big time by raising money and starting a subscription video platform, the HistoryHit SVOD? Or was it number 3, selling HistoryHit to Little Dot Studios and scaling it to take on the global historical event of the decade, the exclusive expedition to find Shackleton's lost ship Endurance?
Oh, I wonder, I bet lots of your guests says, I think it's probably the first one, isn't it? Deep down. It's that journey of 1,000 miles business. It seems so small at the time, but in retrospect, it's just huge. It's just a big, why did I was 32 or wherever I was. Why did I 28? God knows where I was. And I just thought I know there's people out there, there's content creators out there that are seizing the advantages of the internet, and I'm not doing that at the moment, and that just feels so stupid. I've got to try and get some control here, and I think for me personally, that's probably the big swing, but it's tough to decide.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, listen, it's led to all these wonderful, amazing things, that you've made happen for yourself, but also for your community of many thousands of viewers and watchers around the world, and also for your team, who now have wonderful careers and are working with you on incredible content that really matters deeply to a lot of people. So I'm delighted that you took the plunge and started uploading to Facebook and Instagram back in the day, because all that amazing knowledge that you've built along the way is now supporting loads of other people and bringing joy to many thousands of millions of people around the world. So, I'm so pleased that you took that first big swing.
Thanks, man. It means a lot coming from you. Thank you very much indeed.
So that was my conversation with the founder of HistoryHit, Dan Snow. What a wonderful man. He's so charming, eloquent and passionate about history and about what he's doing to kind of bring that to so many people around the world. It was just great to chat with him for an hour. I could have spoken to him all day about his remarkable journey to delivering his very own Netflix of history, which is HistoryHit. And I had 3 main takeaways from our conversation that made me think, sitting here in this hotel room, about just what it was that made Dan Snow so successful on his entrepreneurial journey. And number 1, I think it was being brave enough to disrupt his own career as a TV presenter at its very peak. Bear in mind, Dan Snow was just this fantastic moment for the BBC where they found this dashing, good-looking, eloquent, brilliant young presenter who was kind of ready to go straight out of the box. whose father happened to be a legend of broadcasting, and they married them together, and off they went to tell stories from around the world in a way that was brilliant for the BBC. And Dan was smashing it for them. And as a presenter, he was in high demand for his work telling factual stories to huge global audiences. He was brave enough, Dan, to understand that that wouldn't last forever. And he really put his career on the line, and a real brilliant career on the line at that, at its peak, to set up HistoryHit. And knowing when to disrupt your own success in order to build a bigger, more meaningful enterprise is genius. Everybody should think a lot about that. Don't quit when you're at the bottom, quit when you're going fast at the top. Number 2 was humility. So Dan had this amazing career as a top TV presenter, and starting your own business is a lesson in how difficult things can be. And as Dan recounted, changing the light bulbs and having to figure out problems with passwords and all the rest of it, it must have been really tough. I found it tough going from being well known in the press game to being a TV producer who just couldn't get a meeting. And it sounds like Dan went on a similar journey to that. Dan's humility and being brave enough to put his ego to one side to build something of great value was a standout part of our conversation for me. Number 3 is that long-term vision. Dan knew that if he became the face of history reporting, the guy that everyone thought of when they thought about telling brilliant historical tales, that one day somebody would come along and say, you're the man to tell this remarkable story, this big breakthrough moment of finding Shackleton's ship Endurance under the ice in Antarctica. He knew that if he became number one in his game, the number one guy, that he would get his just desserts in the end. So thank you, Dan, for being so honest, for being kind about your experience with me on the Big Swing podcast. And I can't wait to watch HistoryHit just go from strength to strength over the coming years. The Big Swing was produced in association with the remarkable Spirit Studios. Our executive producer is Fred Casella. Our sound designer is Will Horrocks. And The Big Swing was created by me, Sam Barcroft. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and check out next week's episode with the PR legend that is Justin Crosby.